most recently someone who has been seeing these tapes and had read some of my available writings corresponded with me and expressed something, as I said, that has been expressed before, but I think it's time to bring it up to date and try and get you to look at it with more of a card-sharp's eye. That is, someone, and I'm paraphrasing all this and I'm wrapping up a collection of people's possible thoughts. That is interesting as they find some of this, and as intriguing as seems to be my presentations oftentimes, and so on, it still strikes them to some degree that it's just a bunch of ideas. That is, what can they put their hands on? I have not given out enough, to some people, expected hands-on whatever. Hardly any prayers, hardly any meditation techniques, very little ritualistic worship of moi. That there seems to be a dearth to some people of, tell me what to do. These ideas are just interesting as hell at some times, but my goodness, they're just ideas. Anyone that could be around this, and I give a certain amount of leeway of people getting this second-handed, it's a little more difficult, but anybody could actually be around this almost in the first person, actually a certain length of time, and still find it to be some kind of ideas. Ours have been put to me before. If you recall, the last time I responded to this, someone thought, this is very interesting theories you have. But this time it was put to me as ideas. That no matter how intriguing it seems to be, as opposed to it being something specific to do, it still seems like, quote, just ideas. Can you help me out? Where am I missing the boat? What's going on? All right. To quote the person, I think, they are, in a sense, missing the boat, and something is amiss. And I'm going to give you a rather straightforward description of a phenomenon that is heretofore unnoticed in humanity. Taking ideas, I'll continue to use the person's term, as good as any. Taking ideas, you've got to understand that they are a type of energy. And I can respond to questions and inquiries and bring up my own and use things like sexual attraction, arguments, love affairs, business transactions. And I can point out that they are all interchanges of energy. This is a fact in the same way that we could discuss one night cabbages and next week carrots. They're all food. Ideas are food. Info is food. Data is food. Feelings are food. A punch in the nose is food. A scornful look is food. All food is energy. All energy is data. All data is food. And all food is food. And all info is info. And all energy is energy. For those not listening fast enough, I repeat one more time, a shorthand description, a very valid one, of what humanity is up to, since that's been one of the historic great mysteries. Why am I here? You are here as part of a food chain. But man is unique in that he is part of a food chain that cannot be seen. He's part of a food chain that can be seen, but he is part of a food chain that cannot be seen. And that's what I am calling energy. The food chain that can be seen is energy, but the food chain that cannot be seen. Blue circuit activity, apparent emotional relationships between people. Yellow circuit, in particular, being a unique food exchange, being a unique aspect of a food chain that is invisible, does not leave droppings around on the ground, and you do not pluck it from a garden. Anyone who, after being exposed to this to a certain length of time, finds it to be just ideas, is indeed having a problem. And what I'm going to describe to you is a kind of way There's a three possibilitated way of responses to idea/energy. At the ordinary level, ordinary people respond to the transfer of ideas, that being one description of energy, in the same way that cabbage would be one description of a foodstuff. There are three ordinary responses to idea energy. And since I am the one who has seen this, and I am the one that life has seen fit to encourage me and hint to me and tickle me and say, why don't you bring this up and mention it? And having nothing else planned tonight, I did not bring my accordion, I will. So I'm going to name them for you. And the three ways that ordinary people, the three possible ways that they respond to idea/energy is reactive, resignful, which I'm not sure there is such a word, but I'm going to have to, it fits in with the rhythm of what I'm saying, resignful, and reflective. Now, under all ordinary conditions, all ordinary people will react to, if they're going to react. If the apparent relative charge of what's going on is enough that draws their awareness and their behavior into the orbit of what seems to be going on, that is, it seemed to be the immediate source of this idea energy. If they're going to respond at all, they can be classified under those three. The reactive is the crudest, and this is not necessarily going in any order, quantitatively speaking. Reactive is almost a punch in the nose, or a fuck you too. It would be. My great mystical example of you're out jogging along, minding your own business, and somebody goes by in a truck and hollers, hey, fuck you, fat so, and just immediately you holler, hey, fuck you too. That is what I am referring to as the reactive. It is just totally mechanical. It operates almost as fast as consciousness if it's going to be drawn into this orb, if it's attracted to what seemed to be the source of the ideas. It's just an immediate reaction. It'd be like somebody walking by and stepping on your toe, and just as soon as they did it, you gave them this. The second one, resignful, is that the energy comes, let us say that somebody goes by in the truck and they holler out, hey, fuck you, you ugly son of a bitch. And you keep on jogging. And the resignful aspect is like this. It's not necessarily an immediate kind of hostility or return of any kind of hostility or a return of a similar type passion that seemed to be behind the idea energy. But the two main ways that people would be resignful would be, well, that's the way life is. I mean, there's trash on the highway. There it is. Beer cans, candy wrappers, guys in pickup trucks that holler. I mean, it's life. What are you going to do? And I mean that, and I don't mean that in some philosophical, tolerant way. It's like, well, it's always that way. The other aspect, the possibility of resignful, is like, well, I deserve that kind of crap. Somebody steps on your foot, and it's like, before they can say pardon me, you go, oh, I'm sorry. And if they start to say, I'm sorry, you say, oh, no, I shouldn't have had my foot out there. Really, I shouldn't have. I repeat, the resignful that I'm speaking of is not in any way any kind of tolerance or understanding. It's just, you know, it rains all the time, and every time it rains, if it rains anywhere on this planet, chances are I'm going to be there. It's either the rain's fault that it knew I was all dressed up, or the other possibility, it's not the rain's fault, but I'm just the kind of guy that rain is always right where I am. I might point out that compared to the first one, you could look at it as being, relatively speaking, a more blue circuit reaction. The third ordinary possibility I was calling reflective would be a kind of speculation, would be the kind of person who was ordinarily wired up that their response would be a kind of, relatively speaking, I might say, yellow circuit attempt to speculate on, let us say that their background was such and their molecular yellow circuit structure was such that people go by and holler, fuck you, and you continue jogging, this type of person, and they might say, people who drive pickup trucks normally, at least in this part of the country, normally they're not of the middle, they're not of the upper classes and not necessarily even the middle classes. And so we're talking about people of the lower economic, judge the way this pickup looks. It's not all fixed up and jacked up and waxed. It's just no dirty pickup truck. And it's a fairly well-known fact from what I've read about the kind of treatment that children get from their family in those kind of socioeconomic levels. In other words, there's a kind of speculation you might be of Freudian aspects about why somebody would do this, or perhaps they had a real hard day. Perhaps I'm not dressed right for be running this neighborhood. It's a kind of speculation on what might be going on. It's kind of a theoretical, intellectual attempt to, it may be very fleeting, but to come up with kinds of potential paradigms as to what might have caused this kind of energy, these ideas, to be directed toward me. And even my response to these kind of ideas, I just noticed. What might be in my background that makes me want to respond this way? That's what I'm calling reflective. That covers, I can make subcategories and etc. And as always, you can look for loopholes if you want to waste your time. But that will cover, if you listen to me, that will cover all of the ordinary responses that ordinary people have toward idea energy. It's either going to be just reactive, just blind, almost total red circuit, punch in the nose, or somebody hollers, fuck you, and it's, hey, fuck you too, and that's it. Or a kind of resignation. You know, it's just the way life goes. It's always something. It's always something. And it's usually always on me. That kind of person does not necessarily by any means strike back, to holler fuck you or to hit back. They are not in any way engaged in an intellectual exploration of possibilities. It's just, you know, gee, I've been hit again. I've been struck out and struck at again. That's the way life goes. And the third one I was calling the reflective would be more of those that did not take it in particular as a passionate personal affront, and they by no means would necessarily strike back physically or to curse the person verbally, but might engage in a kind of intellectual sandcastling as to what might be going on here, what could be going on. I repeat, no matter how it sounds, and for different examples I could do it otherwise, but within that which I have described thus far, it is not any quantitative analysis inherent. Just take them as being three possibilities. If you're ordinary, you're going to respond in one of those ways, in one only. Those of you that are getting real good, I'll point out that it happens with people at the ordinary level of consciousness for no particular profitable long-term reason. But there are people that will get a flash of two of them. They'll get a flash of, let us say, the truck goes by and somebody hollers, fuck you. And you go, maybe even get fuck you out, and then the person might reflect just almost, it seems, for a second like, geez, you know, was that necessary, or should I have done that, or maybe they thought I was somebody else. This ex post facto in literature oftentimes passes for an attempt or even a degree of success at understanding, like it would normally be referred to as being able to see two sides of a question, being able to see the other guy's position. But note, I don't have to prove it because you got down your own nervous system. At line level consciousness, this does not lead to anything. It is passing phenomenon like gas. With ordinary people, it goes nowhere. I just threw that in rather parenthetically for some of you that might be sharp enough to see what I'm talking about. But ordinarily, at the ordinary level of consciousness, people react in one way and one way only. Their response, the way that they take the idea energy, is in one of those manners. And to do that leaves everything as being forever just ideas, because you eat it and it's something that you have eaten as far back as you remember. It has no distinguishable taste. It keeps you alive. But if you picked out, speaking of literal foodstuffs, to you the blandest grits with nothing on them, then to take in idea energy in one of the mechanical ways, as I just mentioned, of reactive, resignful, or reflective, you're living on grits with not even a modicum, a pinch of salt. It will keep you alive. You will have, in your way, your own manner, you'll have the sensation of being adequately filled, but you'll never understand anything. You're playing out a quite necessary role in the body of life. The energy comes in, you respond to it, your system does, and it passes along, and it's as though almost nothing happened. It is as mechanical as can be. Dealing with ideas / energy as just ideas, responding to them in the kind of mechanical fashion that I used with the three examples, three possibilities, will chemically hold you right in place. Given certain situations, if you continue to respond in what I'm describing is just a reactive manner, just you return hostility for hostility. If somebody gives you a half-assed smile when you pass by, if you've got time, you might go in return. If somebody steps on your toe, you're prone to kick them in the shins. If you do that, or if, in proper circumstance, to your wiring and the attractions, that you continually feel resigned to what happened, then what is taking place in the same way that self-conversation, self-description, it is a reinforcement, chemically, forget psychologically, forget any kind of quirk in your nature, you or anyone else, to continually respond in one of these manners is to chemically reinforce where you are. And it will keep you blind. It will keep you blind to what this is about. Now let me point out a fourth. Besides the reactive, resignful, and reflective, look at that as being a newscast, come to think about it. And the other way would be the right angle wrap-up, to stick with that dearly beloved field of alliterations so dear to the hearts of all mystics. But as always, if you remember any of the past circumstances like this, a right angle wrap-up is not simply the sum of the first three. Whenever you go into the area of what this is, whenever you go into the area where life is speculating on its own tomorrow, as it were, on man's own tomorrow, as it were, no literary fiction, it is man's absolute tomorrow. But when you get into that area, you cannot take any sort of descriptions, not just from me, but anything that you see. If I can say that everything is supported at our level by three forces, then to see that is not to be able to see simply three forces and say, well, I have seen some kind of triaxual reality. If you can see them all three, they're no longer three. A right angle wrap-up response, the fourth kind of response to the idea energies that are passed along, are not simply in some way being able to simultaneously see and be aware of a possible reactive, resignful, and reflective possibility. It's never the sum of anything that can be described on one level. A true Christian, if there was such a thing, or Jew or Buddhist, would not be all the things that that religion teaches. If you put them all together, it'd be like having the parts to an automobile, and you can name all the parts, and you put them together, and you no longer have piston slash, crankshaft slash, steering wheel slash, seat slash, etc., etc. You got something else. A right angle wrap-up is where you are properly using. You've got to be properly wired up to do so. It's not just through some great attempted effort on an individual's part. That's when you begin to feel and experience that this is not just ideas. And I don't say that in deference to myself or in praise of myself, because I keep taking responsibility. When I write something goes out, I put my name and I put copyright. But I stole it. That's pretty crude for you people on tape. Somebody told me. It's just not somebody you can see. Plus it ain't God. It is life thinking. And life seems to have a few people pop out that it thinks things that go at extreme angles away from the ordinary wrap-up of the evening news at any time and place. Whether it be the tribes of Israel 6,000 years ago, or Muhammad 1,500 years ago, that suddenly it's like a piece of last nervous system, a piece of his brain pops up, and some of what it's been thinking about, it's like almost that one little brain cell comes out and suddenly gets a voice and turns around to some other brain cells nearby and says, hey, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And sometimes the brain cells nearby, you got to figure how everything's connected and justice prevails. Sometimes there's enough brain cells right around there that go, huh. But if it got passed along very far and gets away from that, the locus of where it started, you got over to other brain cells, they'd be going, what? Or else just ignoring it. Foolishness. But it goes at right angles, and it is more than summation of all the possibilities at the ordinary level. If it were not so, it would be just ideas. It would just be a kind of theory. Now, for those that either now or at some time in the future may stumble upon this, that are around these tapes or in my writings or something else and feel after a certain length of time, well, this is just ideas. As intriguing as they are, nothing has happened. Give me something to do. If the persistent feeling of give me something to do specifically is a continuing phenomenon to any of you, I understand it. In times past, you know, I've addressed this once or twice. It is fully understandable. I understand it. I've talked to you about it. I point out that that is a piece of the apparent difficulties in the beginning. I've also pointed out how important it is to life. Witness how prevalent it is of places that have something to do. But I have also pointed out that for the few people, for the brain cells close to the initial locale of where this kind of information comes out, what is normally available, quote, to be done proves to be insufficient. It proves to be mechanically ritualistic. It can even prove to be self-defeating. A kind of apparent worship is taught. You know, we got to worship somebody that's dead. We got to worship somebody that's alive. We have got to undertake very specific physical changes. We all got to stop eating meat. We all got to stop drinking. We all got to cut our hair. We all got to let our hair grow out. We all got to let our beards grow out. We got to shave our beards. We all have to live in the same community. We all got to drink unfermented wine on Thursdays. We got to all pray at 10, 2, and 4 and drink a Dr. Pepper right afterwards. This is necessary. Witness the pageantry of the world's great religions. You know, go into a good big moneyed temple, go into almost any Catholic church, and you see a pageantry. You see a show. And that's in no pejorative sense, because I got to remind you, all of life is showbiz. Those of you who've forgotten it, everything's showbiz. If you're slinging hash at a Waffle House, it's showbiz. If you're an executive secretary, it's showbiz. If you're an executive, it's showbiz. If you're driving a cab, it's showbiz. As you jump in bed with your mate, it's showbiz. It's all showbiz. So there's nothing wrong. But there is built into the many this overbearing feeling that there's got to be something to do, but the rest of you should have known long before you got here. I still hadn't finished this because I am not making any sort of excuse for the way this goes, for the way it has gone. But there is built into the many, and all of you have a piece of it, is tell me what to do. Now I'm talking about quick. I'm serious. I've traveled around the world, and I've went to 2 or 3 gurus before, and I believe either you're it or I'm tired of looking. So look, tell me what to do. I'm a little older now, I'm a little wiser, and I won't hedge my bets. I'll throw myself into it. Just tell me what to do. You want me to shave my head? All right. What do you want? Tell me right quick what to do. When do I pray? What's our holy book? What do I call you? What's your mystical name? Tell me what to do. That is the primary theme of the many. It is very important, pageantry, ritual, and the appearance that there is something to be done. But all of you had enough time to see that the apparent things to be done to you people turned out to be meaningless. No attack on them, it just turned out there was no nourishment. It did not satisfy you at all. You tried your best in 1 or 2, and most of you should just try your best at 1 or 2, and then you could recognize the rest, that you didn't really have to try it, you just understood, now I ain't going to get it. There's no sense me going and trying to pursue that, no sense me trying to reconvert to another religion. I see what's going on, I can just feel if I go do that, I'm still going to be out on street corners or hanging around libraries at night and wondering, does anybody really know what's going on? All right, just ideas. When they start coming from a different place, when they do not come from the ordinary horizontal libraries of the yellow circuit of humanity, when they do not come from the exact time frame in which you are existing, and if you are properly drawn to wherever it is, in this case to what I'm doing, it begins to change when you understand that you cannot just simply have the ordinary response of reacting to it like I don't believe that part, I don't want to listen to that, I'm not going to do that, or of taking anything that I might say in a resignful manner that I understood what you just said, that was an allegorical attack on certain types of people, primarily me, and I deserve it, or of trying to be reflective about all of it, of making notes and going away and thinking, how intriguing. If he were to die, maybe I can even, if I could ever finish school, I might could come up and at least get a job in the philosophy department. I could write a paper on all this. This is weird enough. I'd clean it up a little bit and make it a little more linearly sane and reasonable. But if you simply respond in one of those 3 manners to this, it will forever remain just ideas. But it is more than just ideas. There's enough of you know where I still wouldn't be up to this. Is you actually eat it, a few people. It's not just the task I give. I do give enough. Perhaps not to please all of you, in your opinion, which is very meaningful. I know to some of you it's not enough, but what I'm saying is I give enough that if for no other reason to satisfy some of that need. I'm not saying that's the only thing I do it for. But at least there is the appearance, if nothing else, that there is something to do. Write poems. I want a poem every hour for 2 weeks. And you make a note, and I say, I want everybody to understand it. Now repeat, I'm not saying that that is all I'm up to. I'm not even saying that has any great part of it. But if it was nothing else, it is a partial feeding of that kind of need which all of you should be able to feel exist in your own molecular structure. It is there. It's in you and everyone. But this is food, and it is not ordinary food, and if you would attempt to digest it, that is, respond to it as ordinary food, then it will just be ideas. But you should understand most of you either understand or you strongly suspect, or you begin to have your own feelings, that when you take all this and you try and remember it, I can describe this in several ways. You try and remember it. You try and remember parts that sound like, well, I could use that, or the way he described the example. I could try responding to other people in that way instead of the way that he described most people do, which included me. It was exactly the right description. It covered me. It begins to literally, with the few, it affects the molecular structure of what you are. When it seems to be these quantum steps is what people think of as being some kind of mystical state, ordinary people, it's a one-shot deal. With you people, once you find a certain tempo, some of you are going to find that there is almost a predictable rhythm to it. And once it gets going, it's almost as though nothing's happened in the last, I don't want to give you any hints yet. Some of you might tell, but you might feel as though, well, nothing has happened in the last X weeks or months. And then something happens. I'm talking about something happens. Forget your old ideas of mystical experience. You can feel inside it's as though some kind of psychic surgery or alteration of your molecular structures, as though some drug that you've never heard of that seems to have no adverse side effects, that internally something has happened to a way that if nobody else, that you live now in such a way that I am not internally, forget psychologically, forget physically, it's in toto. The structure of what I am is not what it was X number of weeks ago. It happened again. And it may be very small, except you feel it. And there it is. And some of you will find that there begins to be a kind of tempo that X number of weeks or months after that, you can almost predict it. It'll slip up on you. But within 2 or 3 days later, you go, aha, there's something else. I'm going to say small, which is name the point. But I'm saying that so that you won't think that suddenly you grow wings and fly, and the next number of weeks after that, you can walk on water. Next number of weeks after that, you go boom and turn things into gold. It's not that. But it's what makes life interesting, worthwhile, and fun for a few people, because you have actually changed, and when it happens, you know why I went so long and I said, you know, ordinary change is not possible, ordinary people don't change. And I was not trying to prove I was right. I was not preaching a sermon. I was not saying, look at the rest of life, they're idiots. They say that they change when they find out they're dying of cirrhosis of the liver and they quit drinking and say they change. I said, that's not change. And it's not. It's not growth. Under any ordinary conditions, it's not possible to grow or develop in this lifetime. A few people can, but it does not have to do with growing halos and wings. It is absolute alterations of your molecular system. And you begin to see outside the visible spectrum. And it's not mystical, it's not weird, and it's not that you turned out to be the illegitimate son of Rod Serling. It is simply that it's a known fact that there is a spectrum, there is a range, auditorially, visually, tactically, that the ordinary senses, which is the only way right now that any of you know that you're plugged in to an apparent out there, is that the senses are limited. There are things that are hotter than you've ever felt, but you can't experience it. If you touched it, it's so hot that would kill the sense organs. Cold, the same way. It is a known fact, as none of you will argue, I assume by now, that there are things going on in a sense visually based upon light that's going on right now, and through any ordinary means you can't see it. It's right here. Forget spooks and spirits. It's going on. The same way with the audible spectrum. And through technology you can pick up a lot of this. They can be used. But to use that kind of description, which is not invalid, there's that kind of shock that takes place, that kind of continual alteration of your own molecular structure that in times past people believed. It was a fair explanation back then. Your forefathers and foremothers, it would happen. And they would describe, well, wait a minute, all these years I've prayed and I've sacrificed and I've worked And now I've got to tell you, the gods of our people, or our God, he does at times talk to me. At times he shows me things that are just inexplicable. I can't tell you how I know it. And it's more support for a religion. It's more support for a certain area of life's brain that we're still using those kind of, to what should be us now, archaic, anachronistic approaches. They no longer have enough calcium in them, potassium, not enough podiums. As an aside, I know none of you know, but that's a kind of, well, I'll tell you, I can't resist. There's a place that I jog almost every day, and it's some kind of across-the-counter medication, a box, and it's been there now for about, 2 months. And I run right over it, and it's laying right in the path, and there's this pharmacist, or a doctor, the drawing, and he's pointing right up at me. And it's been washed out and bleached, but it says something about what is needed is more, and it's got this name. Now, it's no known vitamin or chemical I know of. And so it's some trade name. And the first time I glanced at it, I knew that it wasn't this. But since I didn't know what it was some name, and it started with a P. It was some trade name, obviously. And I looked at it, and I made up my own thing, which I do at times. So I'm running over this, and I see this drawing of this important-looking, serious pharmacist or doctor saying, "Son, what you need in your diet is more podiums." So every day I see that, and I like it. That's why I threw that in. So if it's not calcium or potassium, it's you need more podiums in your diet. Your system, I can make it sound that it seems to be located primarily in the yellow circuit, in human consciousness, because that is the one that does verbally, pictorially seem to offer explanations to the individual about what is taking place. But that kind of alteration that used to pass as mystical experience, being touched by the gods, was quite real. It was not up to date, or it's not up to date now, and the explanations, the understanding of it would not be valid for you few people. If it is, you don't belong here with me. If you took it as being some kind of inexplicable, psychic, psychological, spiritual happening, occurrence, something that externally has been given to you, something that is totally beyond the realm of understanding. Now, if that is still your forte, if that would still be your desire to fall into such explanations, you don't really belong here. Because it is understandable, it is quite physical. And there are things that you can see, there are things that you can hear. And as interesting as some of what I say may be here once a week, not to use me as the greatest example, except I'm the best example I know. I just got to level with you. The things I can see and hear, I don't really talk about much, because they're so astounding that they're not astounding. It's just there, you see them, and I have to kind of turn them back into something a little astounding and try to talk about them and get your attention a little bit and sort of go off at right angles and point out how things seem to be and then how things really are not exactly that way. And once you begin to see it, it's all kind of irrelevant, because it's just, there it is. And it's everybody else is living on certain wavelengths, everybody else is seeing things a certain way. It's not any problem. And you see something else. Not different, you see something in addition to. They see light waves cover all this, they see the human potentials, the human possibilities. The limits of what might motivate behavior must fall within this kind of framework. You see that. But you saw that when you were 8 or 9 years old. But now you see, in 2 or 3 other directions, you see where it fit, but it's just over here in one spot. And nobody else is going to see it. Not ordinarily, they're not supposed to. And everybody, even if I warn you or threaten you, everybody tries, once they begin to see into the normally unseen spectrum in the corners, you'll try to grab somebody outside this that you used to know, and you want to grab them, you know, hold them by their little cheeks or shoulders, and you say, listen to me, listen to this, and then look at what I'm doing, and you tell them, and they go. So eventually you find out that people are not supposed to see it. It's not right or wrong, and people are not stupid, and at the very heart of it, you get over thinking, wait a minute, I'm just going to stand up and I'm going to announce this, and as soon as I say it, it's so plain, everybody will go, my God, how did we miss that? No. These are not just ideas. They could be taken that way, and if they are taken that way, it is your fault. And if you don't like the term your fault, you should reconsider whether you belong here. A lot of it does sound like ideas. A lot of it sounds like talk. But, as witnessed by me continuing this, and as witnessed by what many of you can feel and sense about others around in this group, there are people that it has had the effect on. And it's not a matter of anybody thanking me or contributing all to me, but these kind of, quote, ideas are not ordinary, horizontal, mundane energy food. They can be taken that way, and it amounts to nothing. And about the most it would seem to do with some people might be to cause them to respond in a particularly kind of reflective way and to think this may be interesting ideas. These are intriguing theories. But once you can hear, and once you can accept, and once you can chew such ideas in a certain way, they have a specific effect on you. Now, some of you might recall from your past readings, all religions that I can instantaneously recall, somewhere in it have, even if judged on their own time and place, have little messages, have little speculations, even if they were given as absolute truths at the time, about this, about the power of the Word. Some of the religions was always attributed in some way that the voice of the gods, or the God, that he had to deal with words of man. You know, witness all the holy books. Every religion has holy books. But then inside the books is always some kind of message like there are ideas that are way beyond the veil of human presumption, human production, human understanding even. But they have within themselves some kind of power that if the gods were to decide to talk to you and to give you some of these words, it would either open your mind up to a whole new universe, or it would give you a terminal headache probably. Every blood vessel in your brain would explode. It would be as though you went down 200 or 300 feet below sea level instantly, or even below 57th Street, and you got what amounted to the yellow circuit bends. But there is this message, directly or implied, that there is a possibility somewhere that there are words that would just almost shake the foundations of you, if not the universe, but of you, the hearer, that person who might get that close to the gods. All of that is not simply fairy tales. It was a very, compared to nowadays, compared to what I can see, what would be relevant for you people now, it is a pretty childish, it's insufficient, it's outdated, it's not nourishing explanation. But it was based on reality and the kinds of things that life, the ideas that life has told me. You got to assume that they're a little out of the ordinary. What the hell am I doing standing here? Why are we recording this? Why do I have people in other places buying my books? Why do people listen to these tapes? Why do people take it as seriously to write me, to change their life around, to move across the country? I mean, other than my good looks and my charm, my overwhelming charisma. It's something else. Why is it eating my life up? Why can't I get away from it? Which we'll leave for another century to get into that. I guess another lifetime. Consider this. There's a kind of identification, more than kind of. I was going to give you at first kind of sort of a theory, an acoustical musical theory. But the reality of it is more than kind of identification of sounds, of ideas, that is verbally expressed ideas / energy ideas. Let me start with music, which is a fair one, just the physics of acoustics. There's a theory of acoustics. That sound, musically speaking, is identified, it's generally considered by 4 different aspects of pitch, where it is in the musical scale, that yes, that's an A flat. Volume, just the sound pressure, how loud it is, the duration of the note, whether it's long or short, and timbre. T-I-M-B-R-E. Timbre is how you tell that the first 3, let's say, you can identify, or somebody tells you, or let's say you got perfect pitch and somebody plays a note, you go, that's an A flat, above middle C. It's loud, which would take a genius, I guess, to say, that, in other words, you could judge the volume. It's loud, and it was a short note. The duration was short. But with those 3, you really could not, according to the theories and realities of acoustics, you could not say if the A flat came from a piano or a piccolo. You got the timbre, which is the overtones, is how you tell that's a viola, I'm sure. At least I know it's not a tuba, I know it's not an accordion, I know it's not a flute, but anyway, you can tell the difference. That's a piano, they just played that A flat above middle C, and that second A flat was, I believe, a piccolo or a flute. The timbre, the instrument, the resonance of instrument, etc., etc. All right. In these ideas, once this kind of alteration begins to take place in you molecularly, in your hearing, if we're going to keep it on a sensual basis right now, your hearing, I can apparently be talking about different areas, different things. But there comes about that which many of you have begun to experience. It's a kind of holographic timbre. I can apparently be talking about one thing, I can wait 2 or 3 minutes or half an hour later and apparently be talking about something else, or a month later, and you begin to hear the timbre of it. That in a sense, it's the same thing. Now I don't mean, I've made little jokes before about that apparently, I don't mean that I am simply repeating the same thing over and over and changing the examples, but that I'm apparently talking about like 3 forces over here, and then I'm apparently talking about 3 possible responses to the transfer in this energy chain that we could identify just ephemerally, verbally. This one energy chain is based on ideas, and if there are 3 ordinary responses that you begin to hear in a way that identifies, or I could call identification by a kind of holographic timbre, that you realize this is all the same thing, not that I'm talking about the same thing, but once you begin to be able to hear in a certain way outside the limits of the ordinary audio spectrum, is that one piece, if it's a jigsaw puzzle, that one piece, the same way as cutting up a holograph, but that one piece of the puzzle has got every piece of information of the whole down puzzle. That everything is talking once you can hear it, and it's not just talking in a local dialect. It sounds like, all right, there are 3 forces hold everything together. There are 3 legs, like on a stool, that has to support any observable phenomenon. We take notes. If I was going to write some more, I could make that a whole chapter. Chapter 7. Then chapter 8, let's move on to ordinary responses to ideas. But there is a timbre to this that you can begin to recognize, and not just from me. That'll be the first place that you begin to identify it. But then it's everywhere. Flip on the radio, turn on a news commentator. Turn on a guy that's identified as being a right-wing fanatic, and he comments on the news every day at 4:30, and let's say you turn it on, you hear it. Then let's say you turn on the news, and they have their editorial commentator, and he seems to be a left-wing liberal from Harvard. Then your mother-in-law walks through the room, and she makes some offhand comment about what's going on. Then perhaps even your dog barks. And you begin to hear a timbre. The pitch can change, the volume can change. And I mean all this not just literally now. Now we've gone past literally. The duration of it can change, and you begin to hear a timbre. Life itself begins to resonate, and you're no longer listening to a left-wing fanatic, a right-wing dunderhead, your ill-equipped mother-in-law. The timbre becomes suspiciously familiar. There was a great old song from the 30s, I believe, Irving Berlin. It seems that I have heard that song before. Man didn't know what he was doing when he wrote that. But there is, it's been speculated on, it's been turned into, I think some would be metaphysical writers even claim that was the basis of the Star of David. All these ideas that everything that happens somewhere out in the universe is reflected in the smallest little particle of what happens. Poets have written things that the love of all humanity, the love of all the gods for humanity, encompasses the universe and yet resides in the teardrop of a small child. A grain of sand. That's been going on, and a lot of people resonate to that, poetically, spiritually. The philosophers and real dyed-in-the-socks intellectuals did resonate to some sort of theoretical idea, but I am telling you, or giving you another description that is more up to date. It is a kind of holographic timbre, that one piece of it, you've got to have your own system altered. It's not just simply something that I can say, go do it, and you go, grunt, grunt, I'll do it. Your system has to be changed. The kind of receiver you're using is like a J.C. Penney, and they got stations that won't pick up. It's low sensitivity, high rejection rate, low wattage. It's a poor tuner. And what you're looking for is you need one of those $2,000 Macintosh. But it is holographic in the sense that one piece of it contains a lot more information than one piece of a puzzle would normally to ordinary consciousness, to 2 and 3D awareness, that this is one piece, and it fits in somewhere into an overall picture. Except, through any ordinary means, you can't ever get the picture completed. Or somebody tells you, follow this route, follow this system, and you'll get a complete picture. And you do keep putting pieces together, and they say, all right, now you're through. You got your choice. Either you don't feel like you ever get through, or else you do something, people say, well, you're through, and you say, you're kidding. Back where you started. But in this kind of holographic timbre, there's a recognition that you can begin to see that some little something will happen. Some little something that you can hear over here. One word. You can hear one look that somebody makes in response to another idea. And you don't just hear that. You might as well have a piece of an entire holographic impression of the universe. Not that you necessarily understand everything there is to understand about one little piece. for what you understand from that one little piece, from that one word, that one look, that one smell of an atomic movement. It may answer something that you thought would have been far removed in the overall puzzle from what just happened. But then you begin to hear and be able to identify in a kind of holographic way the timbre of this. That I continually change and try and fold up and refold and extend the map and the game of it. And it's not repetition I'm talking about, literally or otherwise, but there is a timbre to it that's all the same. You can't get away from it. Which may sound like a good wrap-up to this paragraph, but then I can't resist saying or pointing out to you that everybody's always believed that there's a right place to make such a comment as, hey, you can't get away from it. About all aspects of life, things will happen to people say, well, you can't get away from it. As though, by saying that, you're also saying that there is a way to get away from anything. Then I got to ask you, where are you going? Does that mean that some of you believe that you have either found or somebody knows where there is a bus station, a Greyhound station, right at the edge of a black hole? That you can't get away from it, as opposed to what, my good man? Well, as opposed to getting away from it. You found a way out of the closet, right? You found a way out of here, right? Not only have they not found a way out, they don't even know where they are. Which to the many is fun enough, because that keeps them stirred up and agitated and transferring energy for 60, 70 years. For a few people, that is not stimulus enough. And it's only them that can understand properly such a wrap-up comment to one paragraph as, how can you get away from it? Where are you going to go? That is funny. I mean, that's so funny I don't even try and get a laugh out of it. But that is funny. So where are you going to go? That is so funny that it's way beyond. I would not soil that. I would not sully that by even smiling, much less laughing. But where are you going to go? Only a few people have known that, and they went. I had a good question written several weeks ago. I don't think I have it with me, but I will rephrase it, if not repeat the way it was asked. The person asked, was it possible that their own present state and progress could be restrained by their own presumptions of what is possible? And they just wrote it on regular little note sheets like we use, and it wasn't big enough for me to get a yes the size I wanted to write. So I was going to save it. That is a question that somewhere along the line, all of you should be able to try and drag in from outside the bus station and throw in the hopper between you and the partnership. It's a hard one to deal with. I brought up a variation of this some years back. One way I present it to you, if any of you were here then and recall, is to just simply try and think of something absolutely new. And then I went a little further and suggested most strongly to you that one of the fine, delightful initial shocks is, which is also very frightening for a split second, is when it strikes you that all of your life, and you could have been hanging around me here for a number of months or years, thinking great thoughts, you thought, having new insights, and one day it strikes you that up until right then, you had never thought anything new. And there's no way for me to adequately describe this in words, because if there was, then my description would open you up like a can. You have to see it for yourself, and it's beyond verbal, that you suddenly see that you have been absolutely limited in a very particular way. Right now you can just look at it as being yellow circuit. It's not limited, but it's the easiest way to describe it, that you have right up to that point been absolutely limited by anything you might understand simply because of the words and the phrases that went on in your head all the time. That even when you thought that you were taking in new ideas, you weren't. Remember, you are not what you eat. What you eat is you. That's the ordinary level. That the things you thought you had heard from me or anywhere that were new, astounding, refreshing, and useful, they weren't. Because you ate them, and they got down in your verbal system, and these same kind of terms, these same words that you had always used, took these ideas and chewed them up, got them just right, and it was like getting a plug of tobacco to fit right in your jaw in the right place, and then it fit, and that was it. It was nothing new. It had become you meat. You ate it, and it became you. There's not much further I care to try and push this verbally because it won't go much further. But enough of you have been through it for me to periodically mention it. It is just, I don't know whether to describe it as frightening or delightful. And neither one of those is sufficient, but it strikes you that I have thought the same thing over and over. And not just that, but I had no other choice. I've had the same words every time I see something, every time I hear something along these areas. I think the same thing over and over because that's the only words I had in my head. And it always seemed proper. Yeah, yeah, well, yeah, yeah. Hey, yeah, yeah. Like that some of them are more important yeahs and some of them are deeper yeahs. But they're not. They're all the same yeah. That reality to you, all understanding, everything was couched in these words. And you can't notice it. That's it. That is reality. That is you. That is not what this is about. But the question about could my present position, could my apparent progress in this be restrained by my presumptions of what is possible? Is reality. That is you. That is not what this is about. But the question about could my present position, could my apparent progress in this be restrained by my presumptions of what is possible? Well, let me put it to you this way. Let me see if I can diagram this correctly. The only trouble with this is if you have to ask that, which the question is fine, but understand I'm now having to jump off at a right angle wrap up. If you have to ask that and I have to give an answer like that, nothing's changed. It may give you a little chill, it may get a laugh out of you. Ah ha ha, yeah. But see, that fits in somewhere. He's saying yes. He's saying yes, and he's trying to make a kind of dramatic effect out of it, just putting C to 114th power, like yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I can dig it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the answer seems to the question about could my presumptions of what's possible be holding me back? And I say yes. And you think, how good to know. That's interesting. That is one of the three ordinary possible responses. Somewhere along the line, maybe some of you understand why, or what I have always attempted in the kind of spicing up, trying to reverse the flavors, trying to say this is going to taste like so-and-so, and then it doesn't. It's always an attempt to keep within a certain kind of reasonable bounds, that is, enough that it does not completely strangle people's awareness for a while, that it almost seems like that the food is fairly normal. Now, I've heard of such food, heard of such ideas. but then it's try to trick you into eating it spiced up with ingredients that don't come out of a normal kitchen, that you do not expect. Another molecular area. It's been going on a while, but I just happened to run across one a day or so ago where I was glancing through a magazine. Now listen, here is life at work on the two levels of how it appears to be, and that which you begin when your eyesight expands encompasses and swallows what appears to be, but then what it adds to it changes absolutely to at least 114 powers what seemed to be your understanding of what was going on. It was a nice middle-class magazine, and the gist of the article was something about how I quit smoking, I think was the name of it. It was a short article, and I read through, and it was a hard-nosed reporter. Now let me tell you, just trust me, this was the way it was presented. I don't have to try and quote it, because I can tell you that if we were ordinary people and I was making a kind of an ordinary psychological retelling of this, and you were sophisticated, psychologically based 20th century men and women, I'm going to talk about the way it seemed to be presented, the way it was edited, then the way that mainstream America that might read it would take it. It all fit right in, by God, as always. But the gist was along these lines. In some way, the guy gave, I guess, information by himself to start with, but he was a hard-nosed reporter, on up in years, been around the world, seen it all, not a pansy, not a nerd, a man's man, been smoking all of his life, 30 or 40 years, thought about quitting. Some of his friends quit. People would get sick here and there, but it always seemed like I couldn't. I mean, I can do things. I've climbed mountains. I've been to Lebanon to get stories in the midst of wars. I jumped out of planes in WW2. I'm a hard drinking, I'm a rough and tumble kind of guy. But I don't know, it just seemed like, smoking is something you can't deal with. I mean, you get the habit, and it's just one of those things that some of us rough and tumble guys do. Then he said, all right, so that's laid out. So you got to get that thing. No apologies, no whining. Didn't say a word about it. He didn't think it was a sin or anything. It was just the kind of thing that some men do, and you get into it, and that's it. And you can't really stop. So then a series of little things happened right quick that he covered in 2 or 3 sentences. So he went, see a doctor, did a few checks, and I said, you're dying of lung cancer, like in the next few days. So, now remember, this is the way it appears to be psychologically. Not just from his viewpoint, the editing, the way it ended up in the magazine, what life is doing, and then the kind of people who read it and the way they take it. Then he reminds you of what a rough and tumble guy, that he realizes how hard it is to quit smoking. He knows that you know how hard it is, but here's the punchline of the little short article. It was amazing that after they told me that, I quit smoking just like that. And you could, of course, you're supposed to feel from the article, which you could. I knew what was aimed at. I knew where it came from. I knew what life was up to. When it said, it was surprising after 40 years how I quit instantly. Just dripping with a kind of sophisticated, sardonic truth. Especially to people who might smoke like, can you dig it? I can handle it. Rough and tumble kind of guy, been around, couldn't seem to stop. I know how hard it is. Even fooled around with stopping a few times. But dig this, my friends. They said, you're dying. There's nothing we can do. It's beyond any attempt at chemotherapy. And of course, we get surgery. You've bought it. The debt has come due, and he said, just like that. Stopped. And of course, he was still alive to write the article. But he said, since then, no problem, no struggle against smoking. And of course, the end result, the article is supposed to be, can you dig it? Does it take this kind of hard lesson? All right, the point is, it's not even, you understand, I'm not just talking about smoking. That was just an example. it would seem to be a kind of message coming from life. Of course, ordinary people seem to be coming from this guy. It seemed, learn from my experience. I'm not a wimp. I'm not crying about it. I faced up to it. I smoked. I knew what I was doing. I knew that people would die from it. And I thought, well, you can't. You can't stop. Not when you're a rough and tumble kind of guy like me. Not when you've been smoking 40 years. You can't stop. That's it. But let me tell you what. They told me I was dying. I stopped. That's how easy it is. Fini. End of article. Kind of thing that the people that was aimed for in Life's body were supposed to read that and be kind of a, quote, psychological shock of Jesus. A kind of, at least theoretical recognition of the truth that I don't doubt it for a minute. If they told me right now, I can dig it. If right now I went to the doctor and within 2 or 3 hours they did tests and said, Mr. Smith, you're dying, your lungs are gone, I can't tell you how much, I can't tell you whether you got a week or a month. I got no doubt that that guy told me the truth. I bet, me too. The psychological shock of that, I bet I could quit. All right. That is what I am saying. It appears to be, it is serving a purpose of some kind. Life is talking to itself. It's coming out through certain people. But it all seems to be a kind of psychological message of what is possible. All right. Some of you should already be able to recognize a kind of holographic timbre. But it's the kind of thing that I keep trying to get some of you to see, and I keep taking it from different songs and medleys. What ordinary people cannot see, what life has not made available to a wide range of human consciousness, is that although this seems to be a kind of psychological consequences, that is, of him saying, hey, you'll be surprised how easy it is to quit smoking like that, when a team of doctors tell you, get your will up to date quick. Don't buy any tickets to the Super Bowl game. It would seem to be that all of this comes about as a kind of psychological consequence, and it is not. That is not it. What life is not made available is the specific chemical alteration of the person to this extraordinary knowledge. Just ideas. But the ideas of this extraordinary knowledge is a man who seems to have the power of the truth behind his words says, we have done the test, and I don't know whether you got a week or a month, but you're a dead man. What life is not made available is simply this. That kind of immediate chemical, molecular alteration in that total person makes a whole series of things possible. Not just quitting smoking. That's what that article was about. You don't think that suddenly his relationship to his wife changed just like that? To his physician that told him that? Just like that? To his estranged children that could be on the other side of the world? Just like that? To a sudden feeling that I am back in touch with the gods of my fathers? Where's a priest? Where's a rabbi? Mail me a virgin nun. And I'm talking just like that, and just as real and just as serious as he apparently was putting out in the article about, hey, you think it's hard to quit smoking? You can do it just like that, which inferring what a tremendous change. 40 years I wanted to stop, thought about stopping, tried a few times and couldn't, thought it was a big deal. Hell, it ain't no big deal. It changed just like that. But it is attributable still to the many, to average consciousness, that all such matters are in some way psychological, that in some way this jolt brought me to my senses and I realized the foolishness of burning up my body by smoking. Just ideas, in this case, just ideas was of an extraordinary molecular nature that somebody with the power of authority says, you are about to wrap up the sale of the farm. you are a goner. Nothing can be done. Don't worry about, hey, just like that, I quit smoking. Take that. Just like that, all sorts of things is possible for a person. All sorts of changes take place. But they're not psychological. They're not spiritual. It was ideas. It was verbal food came in this man's ear that says, you are a dead man, either this week, next week, at least by October. If he thinks, and he's trying to convey, that, hey, and of course sarcastically, remember, that's the basis of this, is sarcastically saying, what a great change I made in myself after hearing this information that I'm dying. That's just one thing. There were other things in that man's life that wasn't the purpose that life was using him for. But that kind of chemical, molecular change in the person through these sounds going in his ear, sound waves from one tongue into one ear, or two ears if he was listening in stereo, saying, Mr. Smith, you are a dead man. Molecules, chemical balances in the blood in that person when he heard, you are a dead man. And let us say that his mother was frightened by an old vaudevillian, so he did a double take like, what? Would you repeat that? You, I'm sorry to say, are a dead man given a Hollywood double take time span within several seconds. These sound waves have gone in here, a molecular change has happened, and him suddenly being able to quit smoking, one of many things. One of many relatively amazing things, because he suddenly wants to see this son from whom he has been estranged for 20 years and hasn't spoken to him. He suddenly wants to look up his father, whom he believes he's hated. He suddenly wants to get back to church. And all of this rushes over him, and it is not, quote, spiritual, it is not, quote, psychological. These ideas, this verbal information of an astounding nature, that is the knowledge of your impending death, that's astounding at the ordinary level. You can trust me on that. The ordinary level, that qualifies as astounding just ideas. But notice the point, among others, I'm going to leave again with you, is ordinarily consciousness does not work along these lines. It seems to have, such as that article, a specific purpose. And it seems to be based upon something that is unique to man, not just the habit of smoking or drinking or something else or reckless driving, but that in some way that there's information, reality conveyed to man psychologically, mentally, spiritually, an awareness that makes specific change possible. To say the very least, concluded he sarcastically, the writer, there is a specific physical, chemical change taking place in somebody with certain kinds of information. This being a drastic kind on the horizontal level, that is the knowledge of your impending death, and it makes things possible that were never possible. Not just the man can give up smoking. Let us say that in this instance, very likely, not just very likely, if I make it up, it's true, that there are instances that the man could have quit smoking easier before this than he could have to ever said another civil word to his son, or to ever gone back into church and looked at a priest and kissed his hand, or to have gone into a church and knelt down and made the sign of the cross, to even got near a church, to ever had a good thought about his father. He could have quit smoking 10 times before he could have done that. But that just seems to be just a given. It's just a kind of accepted spiritual consequence, psychological consequence, and it's not. It's a chemical chain reaction, and consciousness cannot see it. And therefore all the supposed answers are always open-ended to such a point that there seems to never be a satisfactory conclusion other than, all right, when you die, maybe you'll understand it. Nobody wants to face this possibility. It's all right. Maybe when you die, you'll understand it. Well, how about this? Maybe when you die, you're dead. Maybe when you die, that's the end of all understanding. I want to say a word about giving thanks to life. Some of you responded with a giggle or a snort earlier when I was pointing out the paucity of prayers that I have given out, the dearth of encouragement forthcoming from yours truly along such areas as described as prayer. But you should, everybody should do this, even before if I ever do turn into some kind of suggestion, is you should be daily thanking life, and not just in some theoretical way, and not just taking some old hardwired, acquired prayer idea that you've got from your own religion or somewhere else and trying to impose my terms, and instead of saying, thank you, Lord, it's trying to say, thank you, life. I'm not talking about something mechanical. If it doesn't come about through a kind of continuing shaking up of your own internal system, wherein you have a real reason that almost daily you can almost feel little changes enough that if nothing else, and I'm not telling you that I have to use these words because I'm not giving you a prayer, but would be almost every day when you felt like it, which, as I said, if you were doing it right, if you weren't cheating me out of my pants, it would happen almost every day that you would have a real need by the time you got up, and whatever your ritual is of water in the face or do the numbers or run around the block, when you seem to have come to your ordinary state of awareness, that at least there's been a kind of change, if not since yesterday, but a kind of change you've been aware of for the last week or so, that still you're kind of amazed that, hey, this has happened. It has happened again. Something's happened. I'm not going to make that an example. That what you feel like you'd like to do was you wish that life was a big guy. And you wish that right now, after you had a cup of coffee or some Ovaltine and the water on the face, you just suddenly, you walk down the back steps, and you just wish that life was kind of a big guy next door, and he'd come over and you could hit him on the shoulder. And he's not just a buddy, you understand, he's the buddy. And so you're not actually taking liberties, and it's not like you're equals, but you want to say non-verbally, because the buddy, the big guy, you don't use mundane phrases, because he's got to know it all, but you want to at least kind of give him a punch, which means, goddamn, thanks a lot. You know, I mean, thanks. That you understand how boring, how tiresome, how pedantic life can be, how it has been for you, and now here it is that something's happening. It's like a countdown's been going on for you for the last number of years, that you are at the big old Cape, and that surely launch time is approaching. You don't know whether it'll be next week, you don't know whether it'll be, you might die before ignition is fully completed, but they're continually going through the countdown. You can feel it. There's always something going on. They're refueling you somewhere. You're getting fuel in a different place. They've drained out something that's no longer useful, some stale fuel. They've rearranged your rudder somewhere. There is a continual countdown going on that you can feel every day. It's like all these technicians, to some degree, every day is working on you a little bit. And the clock is ticking. It is a kind of countdown going for blast off, and you want to just, if the guy was there, and you go, thanks. As you notice, I periodically take a little asides or parentheticals and point out that you should not take some of what I say, which would be a quite reactive response, and let your own partnership believe that I have simply taken ideas of religions or notions of God and called it life, or the body of life, or the life of life. Because, for reasons that are very specific, and right quick, maybe some of you will get a glimpse of it in a different way. For the few people now, for the few people involved with me as long as I'm alive, if this has any efficacy after I'm dead for any length of time, it will still hold true, that some of you will be responsible for it. This is not coming up with some kind of synonyms or an attempt to recreate gods. That is not sufficient for the few people. It's not sufficient for what life has told me, for what I see. I see what has been sufficient. I see what is not sufficient. And I finally saw, as witnessed by a few of you, that there were a few other people that could hear some of it and that also found it insufficient. But for the few people now, you can no longer thank a God. And if you listen right quick, as I said, some of you may hear something outside the spectrum. The reason is, or a way in which I can describe some of it, it's throughout history, the history of man, the thinking of gods through all normally referred to as prayers. But since I said you should be thanking life, let's refer to it as a thanking of the gods. The whole idea of the reference that has always been used in the thankings of the gods is always based upon these kinds, and this is true all across the board, all time zones, all locales of life's body, on certain stated and even unstated premises, but they're all stated once in every religion, that the God you're thanking is unchanging. That is a definition of God, I think, in the Western dictionary. The relationship of these gods, or God, the God to man, is always static. And the God, the notion of God, is laid out by the religion, by the prophet, the prophets, the commentators. The relationship of the God to the men is always of an external and permanently negative standard. That the God is never pleased. The relationship is fixed. He is external. He is permanently negative. Assume, all right, I'll make sure you're hearing me. He is permanently negative on this basis that man is always striving to please him, to come up to the external standard, which is what man has named as a God. You cannot thank, not the few of you, and you cannot do it profitably anymore. You cannot thank a thing that is unchanging. You cannot serve a thing that is static. It is a premise. It is the kind of information that has been necessary for the many, but it's never been true for the few. You have got to thank, if you're going to, you have got to thank a thing. I'm calling it life. You've got to thank a life that is alive, it is dynamic, and it is understatedly as ever-changing as man is. I can make it even cruder if you can listen real quick. We could say, or I could say, there's always been two gods available. The God at any given time and place of the many and the God of the few. And they're never the same. At any given time and place, the God of the few, those few people understood the other God. They had him down. They understood what was going on, but their awareness of, quote, the God encompassed that and added to it by all senses. The God of the many is always unchanging. Every religion, everything you've ever read is part of ordinary culture. From any time, any place, all of you should know this, they always speak of the God. He's unchanging. He was been this way forever. He's eternal, never changes. And at that level, and inside your own system, you should hear that. That's comforting to know. If we were psychological, if we were Freudianly inclined, you'd say, all right, that's also the way everybody wanted their old man to be, their father, their mother. Unchanging. Depend on them. Not giving to whimsical decisions. But that is not the God of the few. because that God is dead, and life is not dead. Man is not dead. It is not a cul-de-sac. And if you were going to worship the God of the many, you'd be dead. There's nowhere else to go. Because as far as at that level the message goes, and the information goes, and the amount of energy being exchanged goes, God is what he is stated to be. He's always been that way. He hadn't changed a damn bit, and he's not going to change. It's up to you to change. And of course you can't change. And so you've got this permanently negative external standard that will never measure up. But at least we can depend on it. He never changes. The God of the few changes all the time, because he is as alive as you are. If you think you're, or someone in life is mercurial, you just got to understand you are a very poor reflection. You're a minuscule reflection of how ephemeral, how whimsical life is. The only God for the few that would be worthy. I don't mean this in some theoretical sense. I mean worthy, practical, profitable. The proper one to study compared to the God of the many. The God of the few you can't depend on, not unless you got some understanding. Now, let's put it this way. You got to at least understand this, old bromide. You got to have some understanding of this, that the only thing permanent is change. Now, if you got a little bit of that kind of understanding, you'd have a little bit of understanding of the real God of the few. Because you can't worship that which is dead. You can't think that which is dead. There's no profit there. But notice the hold it has. Notice the purpose it serves is to go to a huge cathedral, to a great Christian church. Flying buttresses, the vaulted ceilings, the stained glass windows, the pageantry, the feeling of those around you of reverence. And you're praying, you're thanking, you're beseeching this God that's outside all this, that is permanent, never changing. His message is always the same. He is always the same. And it's up to us to measure up, and none of us can, and that's why we're here on our knees. It all fits. It all feels right to the many. To the few, it stinks. Not because they're wrong. It's outdated. It's in another time zone. It is for the many. It is to serve the greater portion of life's body. It is down serving life's body in the possibilities of reactive, resignful, and reflective. But for the few, you can't worship. That's why I don't lead you to do it. That's why to some of you, apparently in the beginning, you thought I made fun of it and ridiculed, and I told you that was not the point of religions in general and the notion of God. It's a quite valid notion even today in some time zones. But I cannot lead you to think something that is dead, something that is a dead end, something that apparently is unchanging, even if it was true, which is, it's not possible, it's an acme. But the notion that there is a something somewhere that is static forever. Not unless it's changed, not unless we're back to that one. There is no such God. Or if there was such a thing, he certainly wouldn't be a God. Or if he was a God, he would be a lately deceased God. He would be a God who bought the big farm. But I cannot lead, I cannot tell anybody to give thanks to anything that is less than alive. And if it's alive, it's changing. If it's alive, you cannot identify it as being a permanent this or that. You cannot identify it as being permanently here or there. Contraire. It is not there or here. You are. You're in no position to say, there is God. There is some kind of truth. You can't point outside and say that. Or if you can, you're going to have enough fingers to cover all 360 degrees and then understand how to go at right angles to that. And it would have to be in all possible directions at one time. And then by the time you pointed, he would have changed his mind. I could say a lot more and go in different areas about that. But I assure you, when this pops up in life, in times past that you might have thought you recognized traces of it in history or somewhere, the people that may have apparently been the founders of some religion that said, hey, here is a God, and they were apparently, even verbally, what's been remembered, that them saying, all right, here was the God of our fathers, or here was the God that created all, here is the force that has been there forever, non-changing, ever watchful, everywhere at once. If those apparent prophets or founders of religion or very important mystical people, if they were saying that, and if they were in the same kind of job classification that I am now, I assure you that something else was going on. Now, I assure you that they had a few people that they didn't say any of that to, that they explained in the best way they knew how then what this is all about. Because you cannot give thanks, you cannot beseech, you cannot pray to, you cannot give homage to, you can't even correspond with that which is dead. And if it's unchanging, it's dead. And there is no such God. Oh, sure there is, but as I said, there's not. The only thing you can give thanks for is that which is undependable, dynamic, alive, unpredictable. I'm saying a lot to you now because it's not that bad once you begin to see it. Life is not unpredictable. All you got to do is know you, and that's a fair indication. Life is not much better and not much worse than you are running it on ordinary octane. So you don't have to worry about the great unknown future. You see about how you've been operating. You got to see it in a way that's the reality, the 4D reality behind the word objective, but you see how you have been operating. Then you see how everybody else operates, and you understand how life is operating. And you understand that there is no permanency to life. Not anything that fits into any kind of verbal description of a God. So you can't give thanks to an ordinary God. You cannot give homage to anything that is less than literally dynamic. And if it's dynamic, it is changing. That would be the only God worthy to talk to. And since that's already been used, the word is why I don't even use God. But you should be, if you feel it. And you should be feeling it. But if you feel it, you should be giving like a once a day kind of thanks to life for what has happened to you, for what you can see. It deserves at least a nonverbal. And you can't depend on him as being a big old bearded man that every day is in the same place. Some days you may punch him on the shoulder, and some days he may not notice. Some days you punch him on the shoulder, and he may turn around and elbow you. Some days you punch him and smile. He may smile back, and he may ignore you. What kind of God is that? But then you're faced with what I tried to point out to you is, He's your God. You know, how much better off are you? When you get to be better than He is, then you can complain. Then you can laugh. Well, I'm not going to take up what I threatened to last week. And I had several good questions that I don't guess we'll get to, because even as I stand here, I have decided to terminate this communication between me and you earthlings. I've got a task that I want everyone to try and deal with, and that is, first thing I spoke of this evening, of those three ordinary responses of ordinary people to the ordinary flow of energy ideas. That is, of the almost immediate, non-thinking, reactive response, the kind of resignful response I described, and the kind of reflective response. I want all of you to work on next week to try and locate, identify, recognize in you all three. How it has happened, how you can see that it has happened, how you can feel that it happened, is locate all three of those possibilities, those possible responses, each three of them in you, in your ordinary self. And now I'll turn you back over to Earth Central.